Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Cloud Security for Beginners, Part 1, Starting Off in the Cloud. My name is Carol Auth of SANS. Today's featured speaker is Serge Borso, SANS Certified Instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to our presenter.
Thank you, Carol, and welcome everyone. Welcome indeed. Happy Wednesday. We just missed the 2/22/2022 thing yesterday, the Tuesday, but yeah, no, this is still a good day. And I'm happy to be here with all of you, so welcome. As Carol introduced, this is Cloud Security for Beginners, part 1 of 3. Today, as the subtitle denotes, we're going to talk about starting off in the cloud. As the title also denotes, this is for beginners. So we're not going to go super in depth. We're not going to get into command line interfaces or anything too advanced. This is really supposed to be open to the masses. So my objective is going to be keeping it simple, straightforward, educational, and useful. Okay, that's pretty much my big thing here is how can I present something that's going to be of value. I'm not doing this for fun. I'm not doing this to waste anyone's time. I'm doing this so you can get actual value out of your time and learn something about cloud and cloud security and starting off your path or journey as the case may be. With that, this is me. My name is Serge Borso, as you can see. And well, you can Google me if you want to, but briefly, I'm a certified instructor with SANS. I run a company in Denver, Colorado, in the United States, which focuses on cybersecurity, and I do other things like that. Not too many other things, though. That's pretty much all I do is work for my company and teach with SANS. And also, I'm working on an upcoming course, which we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But generally speaking, about 15 or so years of experience in cybersecurity and plenty of time doing cloud security, offensive security, defensive, so on and so forth. So lots and lots of fun times over the years of doing cybersecurity. With that being said, I do want to reiterate what Carol said at the beginning of this, which is please do share any questions that you have throughout the course of this conversation, and it can be much more of a actual conversation and less of a me talking at you about things. And that's typically going to be more fun and more exciting and more interactive for sure. So please do ask questions as we go through this. What I want you to get out of your time today are 3 pretty straightforward ideas here. I'm going to talk about relevant and important terminology. So vocabulary, in essence, is what that comes down to. Not a lot, because I've found over the years that inundating people with a lot of information kind of makes it difficult to absorb that knowledge. So I'm going to keep it simple. I think we have 5 or 6 different terms I'm going to share with you and explain the details of. From there, we'll move on to talking a little bit about your journey with AWS and Azure and getting started in cloud security. And then I'm going to wrap up the conversation today with an actual hands-on, well, a demo at least. I'll be doing hands-on. You can kind of watch a little bit about what that looks like, jumping into AWS and Azure physically or virtually, I guess, so you can see exactly what the interfaces look like and get a little more information about what it would look and feel like as you interacted with each cloud service provider. So with that, I'll move forward and talk about terminology. The first thing is going to be a CSP, and I've even highlighted it in this funky purple color to make it prominent. CSP, a cloud service provider. That's the terminology, that's the abbreviation for our providers. And we're talking about AWS, we're talking about Microsoft Azure, we're talking about Google Cloud, we're talking about Oracle, IBM, Alibaba. These are companies that provide cloud services. Now, what exactly is a quote unquote cloud service? A cloud service is the thing that we purchase. The cloud service. It's kind of an overarching term that means multiple things. So a cloud service could mean infrastructure as a service. It could mean software as a service. It could mean platform as a service. It could mean database as a service, which we'll actually talk about here in a moment because those are other terms I'm going to share with you. In general, though, cloud services are things we can purchase that reside in a quote unquote cloud. So what's the cloud? We're talking about data centers physically located throughout different countries and physical regions in various countries across the planet. These data centers have servers, they have networking equipment, they have fiber optic cables, they have a bunch of networking and physical components like CPUs and memory or RAM, hard drives, things like that. And all these are within data centers and made available to us as a quote unquote service. So this cloud service is the culmination of that hardware being made available to us with the added benefit of these providers, these cloud service providers, offering their own products and services on top of that infrastructure. So when we have a server and a network and this huge data center with a bunch of servers in the data center, it's not doing too much good for anyone unless we can actually make use of it. And that's kind of the concept behind a cloud service. It's the service offering of leveraging that physical hardware within multiple data centers to make use of it in some way, whether it's hosting a database for us or allowing us to log in to our console, which we'll talk about here in just a moment, and interact with the cloud service providers services that they make available to us. So we can turn on a virtual machine, we can configure a virtual firewall, we can configure a virtual database, we can use machine learning and quasi AI, and these are all services that each one of these CSPs makes available for us, the consumer. Okay, so we have a big company. The company has a bunch of hardware. Hardware is made available to us in a virtualized capacity. We leverage that virtualized hardware to use various products and services that are available to us. Now, I'll actually show you what some of these services are, other than just saying database and web servers and machine learning and things like that. There's storage, there's actually dozens and dozens of different services that are available. But the CSP is a cloud service provider, and that's the basic terminology to start off with. Now, I mentioned this just a moment ago. I said infrastructure as a service, which is right here, platform as a service, software as a service. These are extra service offerings on top of the physical data center that each one of these CSPs makes available to us. So to reiterate, the AWSs, the Amazons, the Microsofts of the world, IBMs, Oracles, these companies have physical data centers. They have hardware in those data centers, like I said before, CPUs, RAM, hard drives, networking, and they make those components available to us for a fee that we can then leverage to expand upon. And when we talk about infrastructure as a service, we're basically saying instead of you or I or our company that we work for, instead of us having a network closet or a server room in our physical location, we're going to instead purchase AWS's services or Azure's services from Microsoft. And we're going to instead host our websites, our APIs, our databases, our infrastructure, if you will, within the cloud. Meaning, to reiterate, the cloud meaning someone else's data centers. And of course, there's more to it than that, but generally speaking, that's where we're at. So infrastructure as a service becomes this concept of we're not going to be using our own physical servers and networking and storage. We're going to leverage someone else's, the cloud. And that's what infrastructure as a service is. So it's a service of all of our infrastructure, these things, servers, networking, storage, databases, APIs, things like that, all being hosted in the cloud for us. And we pay money for that based on utilization and things that we'll get into here in a moment. That's infrastructure as a service. It's a service offering being made available to us, the consumer, for a fee. We're basically leveraging someone else's hardware and using it and paying a fee for it. With platform as a service, this is one, as you can kind of see here in the diagram, one step above infrastructure as a service. We're not hosting our own physical, or I'm sorry, our own virtualized servers inside of a cloud environment anymore. With platform as a service, now we're saying, hey, cloud service provider, CSP, AWS, Amazon, Azure, we don't want to have servers that we have to maintain ourselves. We don't want to have to set up a firewall. We don't want to have to set up this backend database. We don't have to set up all this stuff. We want it to be done for us to an extent. So platform, as you can kind of see here, means the operating system itself. We have a Linux machine, a Windows machine. We have other components of that platform stack, if you will. So a Linux operating system, a MySQL database, PHP application, right? Things like that. All of the components required to host a website, as an example, would be platform as a service. So now we're taking kind of one step further and saying, instead of hosting our own web server on our own Linux machine, we're going to pay you to do that for us. So we don't have to worry about updating it, modifying it, changing firewall rules. It's just going to be up and running and working. And that's one layer above infrastructure as a service. With software as a service, now we're talking about we're going to use Gmail or Microsoft 365. And this is those examples would be, we don't have any control over the patching of those servers. We don't have any insight into where they reside at. We don't have any insight into the code base per se of Gmail. It just is up, it's running, it's working, and that's a service that we get to consume. So infrastructure as a service, kind of an analogy here, if you will. It's the car. So here's a really cool looking car that was recently featured on, I think, Jay Leno's Garage. And this infrastructure as a service, to try to break this down to make it super clear and relatable, it's as if you own your own vehicle. With infrastructure as a service, you are responsible for changing the oil, which means you're responsible for turning on a website, a virtual machine, and installing patches on that virtual machine, keeping it up to date, installing anti-malware software on that machine. What else do you do with a car? You change the tires, you purchase it, you pay money for it, you have to pay taxes on it. All those things are true with infrastructure as a service as well. You own it. You are in charge of it. If you choose to not change your tires and you go driving down the road and a tire blows or pops or is damaged, that's on you because you neglected to maintain your car. With infrastructure as a service, you own the car. And if you neglect to maintain your operating system or your database or your API or anything that you're exposing and you get compromised, that's, as we say, on you. That's your fault. And you have full control over your infrastructure. You have full control over your operating systems. You have full control over your APIs. That's your code, your deployment, your configuration, your firewall rules. That's, you own the car. Okay, good. With platform, I'm saying, okay, good. I don't see any comments in here yet. So I'm assuming it's all good. Do you have questions? Stop me at any point in time and I will clarify or answer your question, or at least try to. With platform as a service, sticking with our car analogy, this is where you're, as you can see here on the slide deck, you're renting a car. Hypothetically, right, just to try to keep with the example here. With a rental car, you're not so much responsible for changing the tires or the oil, unless I guess the oil light comes on. You have less responsibility with platform as a service or with a car rental. Same holds true with this part of the conversation. With platform as a service, you're no longer responsible for the firewall rules per se, allowing access to the virtual machine. It's abstracted away from you as the consumer. This is more of a, hey, I have a website, I have the source code, but I don't want to have to deal with the operating system. I don't want to have to deal with patching it. I don't want to have to deal with finagling the network configuration to make sure it's going to work and all that headache. I just want my website to be up and running. So platform as a service is the choice for you. And that's, once again, another option that we have available to us to purchase. Now, Carrie asks, can a company use more than one of these services? What an awesome question. Thank you for that. Thank you so much. The answer is yes, absolutely. As a consumer, it's your choice. Number one, to answer your question directly, yes, anyone can go purchase services from Azure that are falling in the category of infrastructure as a service or platforms as a service or software as a service. Absolutely. You can use Microsoft 365, which is software as a service. You can use a platform as a service offering from Azure, and you can also deploy your own infrastructure if you choose to. How common is that? It's pretty common. It's not uncommon at all. Now, I'm probably going to not do a great job with your name. Fun me, like the analogy of the car, is patching applicable to both infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, or only infrastructure as a service? Patching is applicable to infrastructure as a service. With platform as a service, we are not responsible for it, which is, it's nice, it's convenient, and it's what we're paying for. Okay, so with platform as a service, we're not responsible or in charge. We don't have the insight, we don't have the ability to update the platform. It's what we purchase, it is what it is. You are very welcome. The infrastructure as a service, though, it's on us. We own the car, it's all, yeah. With software as a service, this is more of a, sticking with the analogy to kind of wrap this up, it's a ride share. You don't own the car, you don't rent the car, you don't have any control over the car, you don't have any insight into the level of oil inside the car. It's an electric car, you don't know if the battery's charged or not. You're just assuming it's going to work. It's going to be online, running, and working until it stops working. Like Slack had an outage yesterday. So things like that do happen, but you had no control over it whatsoever. You're just using it and hoping it's online and available. And that's the only component you actually have to deal with. So Vladimir has a question. Do you have any stats on the distribution of services, like infrastructure, platform, and software as a service, which are less or most being used by enterprises today? And what is the strategical future? Cool, thanks, Vladimir. Now, to answer that question, I'll say that 47% of statistics are made up on the spot. So take that for what it's worth. And to seriously answer your question, I don't have the numbers, and because I don't have the numbers in front of me, I hesitate to throw a number out there because it would probably be inaccurate, and I'm not the type of person that wants to be inaccurate about stuff. I will say, well, that's not a nice thing to say. I could probably Google it, but any stats on the distribution of services, as in what companies are using those services, it's very common for to Carrie's question, companies using all these services consistently. But as far as the actual number, I don't have an actual number on that, so I gotta be careful. Now, Vince says with a question, do many software as a service solutions take on the responsibility for breach if it was caused by an exposure with the service? Yes. Great question, Vince. Thank you for that. Do many SaaS solutions take on responsibility for breach? The only thing that we are responsible for with SaaS is the information, the data, if you will, that we provide to that SaaS solution. So let me give you a great example of that. Gmail. Gmail is a SaaS solution. It's software as a service. You log into Gmail, you check your mail, and that's it. Like, you don't get to update Google servers, right? You don't get to deploy any code. That's not how it works. It's you log in, you check your mail, and you send emails. If you send a credit card number over email, that's your choice, and it's your fault, and that's not good. But that's not Gmail's fault. If you choose to send sensitive information that gets breached, that's your fault. Why is this relevant? It's relevant because of the question. If there is a breach, who takes on responsibility of that? If it's something that we exposed ourselves, that's on us. It's our responsibility. If Gmail and the parent company of Google gets compromised, that's on them. That's their responsibility, and that's a lawsuit. Okay, so they are responsible for that service completely. Is it up and running? Is it patched? Is it vulnerable? Is it exposed? Is it compromised? Is it being attacked right now? That's on them. That is completely Gmail's and Google's responsibility in this example. What we choose to share with it is up to us. Other examples here to help drive that topic home. Okay, so what do we have? We have some software as a service. This is Google Drive. We have Salesforce, other websites like that where it's just online, it's running, it's working, it's doing its thing. Software as a service. We have no control over any of this stuff other than what we choose to share with it. And it may be some configuration settings like enforcing two-factor authentication and things like that. Less control, more control. It's a sliding scale. And with platform as a service, similar concept here. We have a software developer, we have a website, we have an API. We want to make that available to the internet, but we don't want to have to host our own server. We don't want to have to set up networking. We don't want to have to set up firewall rules. We don't want to have to deal with all that headache. We just want to deploy our code and push a button and have it up and running. Platform as a service. Less control compared to this infrastructure as a service, but a little bit more control because it's our code base now and things like that. With infrastructure as a service, we're talking our cloud service providers. We have a couple different icons down here to denote that. But generally speaking, that's where we're at. All right, I don't see any other questions that have popped up. Well, maybe one. Another question, what are your viewpoints on BYOK? I'm from Canada. Hey, shouts out to Canada. And we have seen increased security and privacy laws. BYOK seems to help with data exposure to vendors, but HSM becomes a bottleneck and it's expensive. So BYOK, just so everyone's clear, it's bring your own encryption, bring your own key. That's what it is, an encryption key management. Bring your own key. And with an HSM, that's a hardware security module. That's deeper than I wanted to go in the conversation today. This is for beginners, and I'm confident that most beginners don't know what an HSM is, and most of us probably don't know what bring your own key is. In general, well, I still give you an answer though, because you asked it, and that's what I'm here to do. So, viewpoint on bring your own key. Canada, we have seen increase in scrutiny and privacy laws. BYOK seems to help with data exposure to vendors. HSMs are extremely expensive, well, relatively very expensive, I should say. We're talking $20,000 to $30,000 a year for a hardware security module. For all of us here on this webinar right now, we're talking about a device that we can use in our cloud environment to store our sensitive keys, encryption keys, data encryption keys, key encryption keys, like keys we would use to encrypt sensitive information. Where do those super sensitive keys get stored at? They get stored in an HSM, a hardware security module that has a very high level of security when implemented properly. Now, can we bring our own key, or should we use the AWS key that gets generated for us? What's the kind of proper course of action here as it pertains to privacy and things like that, exposures? You gotta do what you gotta do. Crappy answer maybe, but I'm thinking PCI, I'm thinking compliance, I'm thinking most of us don't have to deal with an HSM or even look into it unless there's a regulatory compliance need that dictates that we have to do it. PCI came to my mind a moment ago because that says we have to do things like that. So you kind of have to bite the bullet and pay the money for it, and absolutely bring your own key. You have, highly recommend to bring your own key. That's my 2 cents on it. Not that there's a known exposure that I can point to or a breach of AWS or Azure or the like. I would just say absolutely generate and bring your own key. The importation method is pretty well documented in each vendor. Now, we'll move on. Cloud service provider, our CSP, makes available infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service, these different services for us. And we then are left with the question of, well, how do we actually use these services? The answer is what we're looking at right here. We log in using a browser. Pretty common. I mean, I'm highly confident every single one of you has used a browser today because that's how you join this webinar, I believe, I would imagine. So you go to a website like portal.azure.com or console.aws.amazon.com, and you log in. Username, password, two-factor token, maybe a CAPTCHA, maybe one-time email gets sent to you. A little bit of annoyance there logging into these things. I'm not going to lie. It's not just username and password all the time. Sometimes it's you have to get an email with a one-time token in it. Sometimes you have to have the authenticator app on your phone if you have two-factor authentication turned on, things like that. But this console, which is the terminology that AWS calls their website, okay, let's not overcomplicate it. It's a website. They call it the console, okay? Azure has the exact same thing, and they call it a portal. It's a website. You log into the website, and you click on buttons. We don't need to make it more complicated than it actually is. But I do want to highlight the terminology. Portal is to Azure, as console is to AWS. This or these collectively, or what we call GUIs, a graphical user interface. Just to be clear on the terminology, because that's what this whole third of the conversation is about. The terminology, the vocabulary, a graphical user interface, the web interface, the website, the portal. It's all essentially synonymous. It all means the exact same thing until you start getting a little more nuanced. Like I said, this is technically called the portal, but it's also a website. It's also a web interface. It's also a GUI, okay? As opposed to something like a command line interface. So it wouldn't be a GUI, it would be a CLI, a command line interface, which we're not going to get into today. But we certainly will in another example. More specifically, what I mean by that is this is part 1 of 3. So we have more to go through. But for now, that's where we're at. This is a web interface. It's a GUI. It's a portal. That's where we log in to interact with this. How do we log in? Username, password, and a token. A token. What is a token? Well, it depends on the context, but generally speaking, it's one of these things right here. Now I'll pause. John Lewis, what does Google call their GCP web interface? They also call it a console. Let's see, let me make sure I'm right on that. Because confident, but I could be wrong too. Yeah, it's just a cloud console is what they call it. I was pretty sure, but since you asked, I want to make sure I'm really sure. Google calls theirs the cloud console. Same thing though. And that's to kind of piggyback on that question and that kind of thought, which a lot of you are probably having. You know, if Azure calls it a portal and AWS calls it a console and Google calls it a cloud console, but here I am saying it's all the same thing. It's just a website. I'm not trying to water it down or make it anything other than easy to understand. Okay, there is different terminology and it's relevant. However, we're talking about the same thing. It's a website you go to click buttons and pay for services and interact with your cloud environment. Okay, there's a lot of complexities behind it, and we can get into some very complex components of it. But generally speaking, that's the straightforward way of answering what these websites are called. How we log into these websites, it depends on how we have it configured. Okay, it could be you have a username, you have a password, you click a button to log in with. When we start focusing more on security, that's when we shift the conversation into this next topic, this next terminology. Multi-factor authentication and or two-factor authentication, okay? This is a means of proving our identity to an extent. So when we log into our portal or our console, we have to actually prove we are who we say we are. This isn't very uncommon. I'm very sure that every single one of you has experience logging into a website. Okay? It's username, password, and you log in. When we want to add additional security layers, or at least additional security, leave it at that, on top of username and password, we implement or turn on or enable two-factor authentication. It's also called multi-factor authentication. Slight difference there, but in essence, we're talking about these three things. Authenticating via something that you know, as in I know what my username is, I know what my password is, and I have a mobile app that asks for a token, and that mobile app is on a phone, and the phone is something I have. Biometrics would be I have a fingerprint, I have a retina, I have a voice, I have DNA. If you want to stick your finger into a pin, get it pricked, and the blood drips out, and then you get the DNA. Yeah, that doesn't exist, but if it did, that'd be kind of cool. Or it'd be terrible, just depends on kind of how you feel about that. Nevertheless, those are three ways we can authenticate to our application, and more specifically to our cloud service provider. Okay, username, password, token. This is important, and I've chosen to spend a few moments talking about it because of its importance. When you read a headline about someone's Twitter account being quote unquote hacked, or you read about something like the pipeline, what was the name of that pipeline on the East Coast of the United States that got compromised, or things like that, and you dig into the stories a little bit, and they say, oh, there's a default password that was set, or there's a weak password, someone guessed the password, so on and so forth. Okay, maybe you have a really weak password. Maybe your password is only 8 characters or something, and someone guessed your username, they guessed your password, log into your portal. Colonial pipeline, thank you. Yeah. Well, how can we make it more difficult for the adversary to gain access to our account? How can we make it more challenging for the attackers to compromise our cloud services? The answer is right here. That's what I'm talking about, enabling multi-factor authentication, or two-factor. This way, the adversary would have to not only guess your username, which is very easy to do, and guess your password, which is doable, they'd also have to have access to your token, which is more challenging. Significantly more challenging to do consistently. Okay. Now I'm harping on this because it's not enabled by default. You have to consciously choose to turn this on or enable it for your account. And your account is nothing more than, let's make sure we're on the same page. You log into a website. Okay. Make it simple. There's a website, you log in, username, password, and now you can turn on the token, which is more inconvenient, but also more secure. So I highly recommend doing that. So here's where we're at. Our CSP is our cloud service provider. We talked about all the different services out there and how we interact with our cloud service provider and the importance of two-factor or multi-factor authentication. I'm going to pause for a moment and ask if there's any questions about anything so far. All right, cool. Now, this is only like, what, 6 things? Well, 6 things is a good number because you start adding more than that, and it's a little more challenging to remember everything. So these are the important terms, in my opinion, that I think will be very helpful for you to get started off with. There's a lot more terms out there, though. A lot more acronyms, a lot more abbreviations, and a lot more stuff like that. Now, how do we actually start using our cloud service provider? And I'm focusing strictly on AWS and Azure for a couple different reasons. The way we get started with this, and I'm not telling you to go do this right now or that this is something that's homework for you to do. This is just part of the conversation. It's up to you how you choose to move forward. And the way you can do it is with our free tier and free credits. but I'll stop and answer a question. So Julian says, where does Apple iCloud fit in? Apple iCloud fits in as software as a service. Because it's software, it's a website that you go to that is allowing you to, among other things, let's go with backup files, okay? You, Julian, and Karen, and William, and everyone else on this call, or this webinar, you don't have any control over iCloud.com or apple.icloud.com or wherever the URL is. You don't have any control over that. You don't have any control over the server that iCloud resides on. You don't have any control over the database. You don't have any control over the keys or the encryption of your data. You have no control over any of it. The only thing that you have control over is what you and celebrities choose to share with iCloud. Yeah, I'm a funny guy. I throw stuff like that in all the time. Maybe it's not funny to you, but it is to me. So what you choose to share with iCloud is on you. It's software as a service. Marcos, what are the main requirements to choose a cloud service provider? What are the main requirements? Yeah, Wilson. Those of you who get it, you get it. All right. So what are the main requirements to choose a CSP? It's the choice comes down to where you're at and what you're doing and what your specific requirements are. So it's kind of a vague answer. What does it actually mean? So let's talk about what that means. If you're Marcos, or you're Wilson, or whomever, and you're thinking, okay, so this webinar is awesome. The surge guy, he's spot on. I'm going to go do all this stuff. And I know all of you are thinking that right now. So what do you do about it? What are the requirements to choosing a CSP? Are you an individual trying to learn a little bit more about this? Are you doing a career change and you want to make sure you understand platform as a service because you want to delve into AWS Beanstalk, for example, as the name of a service, that's platform as a service? Or is this you work for a company and your company is saying, hey, Marcos, you are going to be in charge of our new cloud environment starting on Friday. So the perspective that you come at this with is going to help dictate which CSP is appropriate for you and what the appropriate course of action is going to be for you to take. Okay, so it's not a quick, straightforward answer. The requirements are really going to come down to what your business dictates and what your personal needs are, or kind of where you want to go. And I'll add more insight into that as we continue the conversation. Okay, so another question, which one is aligned to Azure AWS versus the portal and console? Let me reiterate that. The Azure cloud service provider, which is Microsoft Azure, calls their web interface the portal. AWS calls it the console. Another comment here, I would choose a FedRAMP approved CSPs. If you're dealing with federal government data, then absolutely. Now, which CSP is approved for FedRAMP, and this is more of a compliance governance type of topic, maybe even to kind of speak back to Marco's question, what's the main requirement to choose? Well, it depends on what the requirements of your business are. And if you're doing FedRAMP, then you just choose a CSP that's FedRAMP approved or certified. And it's going to be AWS, Azure to a lesser extent, Google to a lesser extent. AWS has been on the scene and has dominance in the market. And because of that, they are farther ahead with some things like FedRAMP compliance. It's not an on-off switch where the entire CSP is FedRAMP authorized. It's more of this service within AWS or within Azure is authorized. So great questions. Patrick, are any of these services called shadow IT? No. Shadow IT is something different where you maybe just to answer that kind of thought process there. Shadow IT, you could think of that as you work for a company and your company is on-prem, meaning on premises, meaning you have your own data center or your own server room with some servers in it. And someone from another team says, hey, I don't want to use our servers. I want to use AWS. So instead of going through the change management process and getting approvals, they just pull out their corporate credit card and they log into AWS, they purchase it with their corporate credit card, and they start standing up web servers and firewalls and so on and so forth. That's an example of shadow IT, because now we have a whole other IT department and a whole other environment, if you will, servers, websites, APIs, databases, that's living somewhere else, where the security team and the on-premises IT team may not even know it exists. And I have been there and seen that. I was going to say done that. I didn't do it. I've been there and seen that as a security professional, and it was concerning. Okay, lack of control. Now, starting with AWS and Azure, you get free choices. There's a free tier with AWS. Okay, and there's some things that are always going to be free. There's some things that'll be free for 1 year. And the reality is that nothing's actually free. Yeah, there's a free tier, and in Azure you can sign up and get free credits, like $200 about worth of free credits. And once those credits run out, you start getting charged. Once you start using things outside the free tier or things that aren't covered in the free tier, you get charged. Okay, make no mistake, AWS, Azure, these are billion-dollar companies. These are for-profit companies, and they're not donating things for fun. Okay, the intent here is to make money, not anything else. So let's be clear on that. And because of that, you're going to pay money eventually at some point in time. But you can start with a free tier. The pros and cons here is to highlight this. The pros are that you can get started and it will be free. The cons of this are that it's not free forever. You will run out of credits and you will be charged. And you may end up in a situation where you're listening to me right now, you're thinking, this is awesome, I want to go take the next step. And you go sign up for your account and then you don't do anything with it because you don't know what to do, or because you don't have the ideas of a project or the next steps to take, and you sit there with your free credits and they expire and you didn't get the value out of them. Things like that will happen. So we gotta be careful. How safe is the shadow IT? It's not safe at all. Typically, being shadow in the shadows, we're talking about as an example, security team at your organization doesn't even know it exists. Therefore, it's difficult to secure it or have any insight into it if I don't know it exists. Going back to the car analogy, like if you go out and buy a car and don't tell me about it, and I'm in charge of, securing all of our cars, you don't park it in the garage, you don't change the oil, you don't lock it when you leave, I have no control over that. So that's the kind of concept, harkening back to the analogy about cars and software as a service and so on. But yeah, so safe, I'm not saying you can't deploy it safely. I'm saying as part of the organization, the security team may not have any insight into its existence, and therefore they can't secure it. So it's not a good idea typically. Yes, first things is to set the alarm in case you get some budget. Yeah, absolutely. So to Wilson's point here, I believe we're talking about you can set up alarms and budgets within our CSPs, so you know if you're going over. The other thing here to kind of continue the conversation about, well, this is an interesting conversation, I want to get into this more, where do I start, what do I do? I'm saying you got to have it's useful to have a goal, useful to have some type of idea of where you want to take this. And just starting out, because this is completely aimed at beginners, which I'd imagine a lot of you are, you don't necessarily start off with a goal and know exactly what you want to do. This is the beginning. You don't know where to go. Okay, for a lot of you, I imagine that's true, and that's kind of probably why you're here, for some maybe direction, right? So what I'm going to say is this is part 1 of 3. There's 2 more webinars talking about getting into cloud and where to take this. So I would say, take it easy, sign up for the other 2 webinars, and get some insight as we continue. I'm not going to have all the answers today because there's a lot to discuss. So if you are more inclined to say, okay, I at least want to get started off, this is where my career is going, I'm going to take the reins, so to speak, and go and do something, have a goal, have a purpose, do something. Try to make sure you're understanding where you're at, where you're trying to get to. leverage your background. If you're brand new to security and IT in general, then you don't really have a lot of background with IT because you're brand new to it. So take that into consideration. And of course, the ultimate point of interest here is where you're trying to get to. Is this for the next logical step in your career path? Is this for promotion? Is this because you want to quit your job and go somewhere else? Is this for a side project you want to start up at home? It just depends what you're trying to accomplish. But having that goal, having that purpose is going to help you answer these questions for yourself, because I can't answer them for you. Okay? But I can help. I can definitely help you. I can help guide you for sure. Now, part of that guidance, I would say, is come up with a plan of attack. This goes hand in hand with what are you trying to get out of your career path. Okay. I'll pause there. George, what are the other two classes? How to sign up for them? At the end of this session today, I have some links that I'll share for sure. So you'll have the ability to sign up for those two other classes and get notified as well. With this concept of working on a project, learning the basics, what are these basics? It just depends. Is it platform as a service because you want to deploy a website? Is it infrastructure as a service because you want to deploy a website doing it all yourself? Is it software as a service? Is it these other services within our cloud service provider that you can leverage and pay for because you just want to learn how security works, or how logging works, or how monitoring works, how budgeting works, how you get charged for API requests, what an API is? You want to speak more fluently about cloud? It's kind of a wide open space and forum. Okay, so project in my mind would be kind of the example I just mentioned a moment ago. You want to deploy a website. That's a project. For those of you who've done it, it's very straightforward. For those of you who've never done it, it's very hard to do. Okay, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Anything that is brand new to you is typically going to be challenging. Someone says, well, it's just like riding a bike. Yeah, well, if you've never ridden a bike before, it's not that easy. That's reality. Okay, so doing something like challenging yourself is going to be super helpful. Okay, so George says, being in the mainframe environment, we have set up disaster recovery plans. Does the CSP have a disaster plan, or are you out of business if down? Great question. So to answer that, I would say Slack. If you're familiar with Slack, they had an outage yesterday, a sporadic outage, I believe, just yesterday. And Slack is probably $1 billion+ company, I'd imagine. AWS, Amazon is $1 billion company. Microsoft is these are all multi-billion dollar companies. What's my point? My point is that even huge companies with all the infrastructure in the world, so to speak, they still have outages. So if you're paying for your CSP and you're leveraging their services and you're in the cloud and things are going fine and they go offline, that's on you. Okay, they might give you a refund, a partial refund or something, but typically not. And more to the point, you need to be prepared for that. So how do you prepare for that? Briefly, as an aside, I would say duplicate your services in both Azure and AWS. And if one of them goes down, the other one will probably be up, right? Who knows? We don't have any control over that. Other thing, of course, is hybrid, where you could keep your on-prem, which is on-premises, which means your server room or your rack or your closet or whatever you have running right now that's not in the cloud. Keep that up and running and duplicate that in AWS, for example. And if either one of those places goes offline, you're still up and running. And that would be an example, once again, of a project that you could work on. You can keep it simple. And of course, you want to go through the process of thinking what's relevant for you. And that's right back to George's question of disaster recovery or business continuity, keeping things up and running. Could be a website, could be an API, could be a bucket where you store content at, things like that. It could be anything. Okay, these are all services that we could leverage and pay for and consume and keep online and running. So you got to create it for yourself. Like I said, I can't answer exactly where to go as far as tell you what to do. I can guide you though, and I'm happy to help out with that. But you got to create kind of your own reality. With that, we have our terminology we talked about, getting started in our cloud, having a purpose, I think is going to be super useful for you to do. And just to reiterate, thinking through what's relevant and important for you, where you're at in life and your career right now, where you're trying to get to. Okay, straightforward. If you spend the time to think through how that's going to play out for you in your personal and professional lives. Now, understanding the console and the portal. Let's stop talking about it and start doing it. And for this part, I'm going to rely on fact that I've set stuff up a little bit before class, and I'm going to share another screen so you can see exactly the relevancy here. So I'll share this screen right here, and yeah, should be good to go. All right, this is an account, kind of like a demo account that I have set up in AWS. I have a similar one set up in Azure. And as you can see, I'm assuming you can see this very clearly, there is nothing more here other than to start off with a browser. Zooming in a little bit, we have website I've gone to. I'm not going to go through the login process because it was tedious and I already logged in, so I'm not going to do that again. And you don't need to see all my password information. But once I log in, we can see a couple of things I've recently visited. This is the new updated console in AWS. For those of you who haven't logged in, you're like, he's talking about new. I've never even seen it before, so that's kind of irrelevant. That's true. However, why I mention that is because I want to make it clear that AWS does update their interface pretty regularly. And it changes. Okay, so here we have some recently visited services and welcome and some things I've spent money on lately. I'm down 8% from last month. Cool. Last month I spent $100 or about in costs. And what are those costs? What am I spending money on? Is this relevant? Is this important? Well, number one cost looks like it's Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, which is EC2. Elastic Compute Cloud, EC2. And other EC2, and I got some security hub stuff, some tax. That's not too bad for this test account that I've set up. So let's go check out EC2, because this is a pretty popular service. What we do with EC2, Elastic Cloud Compute, is we can use this service to turn on virtual machines. A virtual machine in AWS is called an instance. An instance. That's a virtual machine, which is basically a computer that's running virtually inside of AWS. Okay. With those machines that are running, and all I'm doing here is, I logged in, I clicked on services, I clicked on EC2. Right? I'm not trying to overcomplicate it. That's all I'm doing. Website, browser, mouse, pretty straightforward stuff. Configuring these instances and setting things up, that's different. Okay. And I'm going to spend a lot more time doing this in the next series in, I think next month is when that comes up. So I'll actually deploy an instance. I'll walk through how to do that. I'll walk through setting up firewall rules. For now, I just want to show you the interface. Within EC2, this is basically a menu. Within this menu, there's things you can click on. The global view, you can see events. Click on the button, you see if there's any events. And you got to filter on certain events to search for them. Tags, if they're turned on. Limits, types of instances, as in when you go to deploy a virtual machine, for example, you can choose to say, I want this specific machine to have these physical attributes. Even though it's virtualized, you can say, I want 20 different CPUs, I want 24 gigs of RAM, and you can see all these things right here. What's also relevant, that the name of the instance or the virtual machine is right here, a micro, a small, a medium, and these directly correlate to how many virtual CPUs, for example, the type of platform it is, how much memory, like I said, you can get 32 gigs of RAM, 8 CPUs, and that's going to cost you some money. So if I looked at the pricing for this T2 2X large, we're talking 37 cents per hour, which is like, okay, that seems all right. Well, if we do the math on that and we look at 0.37 cents times 24 hours in a day, that's $8.88 a day. And say there's 30 days in a month, that's $266 per month for one machine to be turned on and running if it's a T2 2X large instance. Why? Because it has a bunch of memory, it has a bunch of RAM, right? CPUs, cores. What's the point? The point is the details are here for you to look into. I'm not going to go much deeper than this right now because it's not relevant. It will be more relevant next time I do a webinar on this. But for now, it's the portal, or sorry, the console. You click on buttons, you can learn about the different services, you can see what's available, you can navigate around. Same thing for Azure. This is the Azure Portal. And we can see, similar to the services over here in AWS, there's a services button, and you see what I recently viewed. I can go back to the home console. Same thing for the portal. There's services. There's a menu drop down. I can create different resources. I can do a bunch of different things. Okay, I can monitor what's going on. I can look at different virtual machines. I can click a button. I can look at my dashboard. I can do all the different services. And this goes back to the conversation we had earlier about, well, what's actually available. And you can see these services are all grouped together with a resource group, as in I have maybe one dedicated website or one dedicated project I'm working on, and you put those together, it's in the resource group itself. Now, Eric says, if the machine is doing no work, does it cost? Yes, absolutely. Well, no. Yes and no. It can. So to reiterate, Eric's like, hey, if we have a machine based on the EC2 instance thing I said a moment ago, hundreds of dollars per month, if it's not doing anything, does it still cost? Yes. Like if it's online and running, even if it's not processing, or you haven't deployed a website to it, or it's basically sitting there doing nothing, absolutely you will be charged full price. Now, flip side of that, you can use platform as a service, you can use a spot instance, you can use functions like a Lambda function. And what you're doing with these other services is you're basically saying, hey, I need this function to run. I need this website to host content, or I need this API to be up and running. But I don't want to pay for it unless it's being used. You know, and I don't need to have a $266 computer running in the cloud doing nothing. But I do need to have something up and running in case someone makes a request to my API or to my website or to my mobile application or whatever it happens to be, right? So I can pay instead for that request, and that would be pay for the function of like a Lambda function, which I'm not going to get into in more depth than that. Just know that there are other services that are much more cost effective if you don't need a machine running all the time. And Tony, yes, this is the same as VDI, virtual desktop internet. Yep, it's essentially a virtualized machine. And then Tony also says, are we limited on how many logical CPUs? 24. There is a limitation, absolutely. The upper limit is how much money do you want to spend? You can get more GPUs if you want to do some Bitcoin mining or other type of cryptocurrency mining. You can get a bunch of CPUs, you can get a bunch of RAM, you can get whatever you need in essence. Or if there's you hit the max at 64 or 128, then you can get 2 of them to double up. But you're going to pay a lot of money for that. Now on AWS, is it infrastructure as service? Yes. So everything we're looking at here, thank you for that. This is all infrastructure as service. So these resources, if I go to create a new machine, I'll create a new Windows Server 2019 machine, for example. And this is infrastructure as a service. Okay, I'm going to say, I'm going to give my, test machine over here a name. I'm going to say what region or location, what data centers I want this to run out of. Okay, I get to choose that. And then I get to say what type of operating system it's going to be and the sizing, which tells me right here in Azure, it's going to cost about $7 a month with 1 CPU and half a gig of RAM. If I want to upsize that, now I'm paying, 16 gigs of memory and 2 CPUs, whoop-de-woo. Now I have $160 a month for this machine to be online and running and doing nothing or doing a lot. It just depends. Depends if I'm pointing traffic to it or how we have it configured and what we have it configured to do. But rest assured, to reiterate the answer to that question, we will be being charged this amount every single month for this server to be running. This is all infrastructure as a service. Why? Because this is the definition of infrastructure. This is a server. It's Windows Server 2019 Data Center Edition. This is the operating system that we're going to be using, and that server is infrastructure. Infrastructure as a service. All right, we are at the top of the hour. I will see you in the next meeting as well. Patrick, can AWS host Microsoft operating systems? Absolutely. Yep. Darshan, absolutely. AWS can host Microsoft, they can host Linux. You have choices of what machines you can run with a drop-down box, but absolutely, you can choose that in a drop-down box, or you can even upload your own image. Cloud, cyber, do we get the recording afterwards or be uploaded on YouTube? Laura Dawson is answering your question right now. Ada, you're very welcome. And I see we're at the top of the hour, so I will come on back to this and say, where do we go? Answer the question. What are we doing next? This is the next thing we're doing. Well, it's your choice. Beta 388. This is the course that I wrote. This is the introduction to cloud computing and security. And this is a logical next step. We have a beta run coming up of this. You can follow that link right now in your browser and sign up for your interest in the release of this course. That's my best advice. What else? This is today. We started off. What we do next? On March 10th, we're going to actually work in the cloud. So I'm going to be spending maybe less time talking, more time doing. Deploy your virtual machine, configure a firewall rule, test out our access, moving onward and upward. And then on April 5th, part 3 of this 3-part series, we will be talking about defending our cloud infrastructure. So we talked about it today. We'll do it more on March 10th. And on April 5th, we'll start defending it. Fun times, good times, and there's always more and upcoming stuff with SANS. You are all very welcome. I hope to see you next time we do this. And I hope to see you at summits. I hope to see you all around the place. And it's a challenge to you. I always put this up or something like this, and most people don't do anything with it, which is your choice. I will challenge you. Connect, reach out, stay in touch, ask questions, have fun. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, I should share the correct screen. That would be super helpful, wouldn't it?
All right. Well,
can you please share the correct screen?
What's that?
All right. Thank you, Carol. I'll pass it back to you. So thank you very
much. All
right.
right. Thank you so much, Serge, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.